Years ago, I had a heated debate with my brother about the colour of a blouse he was wearing. He was saying it was green and I was saying it was blue, and neither of them agreed with the other. That was in another time, where access to smartphones wasn't so simple, so we didn't have internet at hand to solve this impasse like we do today. When I got home, I made sure to go to Google and send him a reference showing that the colour was teal. And at that time you turn to me and say, "So, your brother was wrong." And I ask you, was he really wrong? What is a colour? What is the name of a colour? And you might be wondering, why the hell am I talking about this in a video whose title is Who Are You? But what I want to show you is that the same principle of colour occurs when it comes to human behaviour. I'm going to ask you, then, that question. Who are you? What made you who you are today? But since these questions are so broad, I'm going to take a simpler example for today's video. Imagine a human being, a man, is driving a car to his job. Suddenly, without any warning on a major avenue and therefore at considerable speed, another car gets in front of his car and almost causes an accident. The man instantly turns the wheel and swerves. He narrowly avoids that accident. Then he accelerates, pairs the car next to the guy who almost caused that accident. And then this man lowers the glass and starts cursing at the guy. Why did he do this? At first glance, this question seems simple. She seems easy to answer. You tell me. He got pissed off. He got mad, and that's why he reacted like that. But the purpose of today's video is precisely to show you that when it comes to behaviour, things are not as simple as they seem. I study the human brain, and as someone who studies the brain, I can give you an answer to that question. Why did the man do that? The instant the man's brain detected another car coming toward him, motion brain circuits such as the motor cortex and cerebellum instinctively activated, causing him to activate the muscles of his arms, hands and feet, turning the steering wheel quickly and braking at the same time. Immediately after what happened, some brain circuits in this man's limbic system activated, producing an emotional response and the feeling of anger. Becoming aware of this feeling, his brain's planning and decision-making circuits commanded the movement circuits to move this man's arms, hands, feet and legs. The foot came off the brake and stepped on the accelerator, the hands guided the steering wheel for the car to pair, and then the left hand lowered the driver's window, and then the language circuits, largely influenced by these emotional circuits, were activated, and with that the man yelled and cursed at the guy who almost caused the accident. Don't worry, I know I said a lot of names here about brain circuits, and you will understand all these circuits in future videos on the channel. Just keep following us and you will understand everything I said here in depth. But then, okay, I answered why the man did that and I gave a neurophysiological response. Is this answer wrong? No. Is she correct? It seems so. Does it answer the question? No, at least not entirely. Let's try another answer. The society in which this man was born and raised lives a culture that encourages men to respond aggressively when they feel threatened, especially in traffic. Okay, that's an anthropological social response. We're looking at culture and society. That's an answer that seems to be right. It doesn't seem like a wrong answer, but again, it doesn't fully answer the question. So let's move on to one more answer. This man, a few weeks ago, started practicing physical activity, weight training and running. In addition to physical activity, he began taking a dietary supplement made from the root of a plant called Tribulus terrestris. In addition, he's eaten good amounts of spinach every day over the past few weeks. And on top of that, he met a woman and fell madly in love with that woman. The physical activity, along with this root that he's supplementing, along with the spinach, along with this recent passion, in short, all of this has significantly increased the levels of testosterone in this man's body. These elevated testosterone levels made some receptors in the limbic system of this man's brain more sensitive. These are brain circuits particularly involved in territoriality and aggressiveness. And because these circuits were more sensitive because of the testosterone, the emotional response of anger was more intense and produced the man's aggressive behavior. Okay, this is a neuroendocrinological response, meaning it focuses on the relationships between glands, hormones and the brain. But it is also a nutritional response after all. Our body's hormonal gradients depend a lot on what we eat. But it is also an effective and social neuroscience response after all. The relationship between men and women is associated with the feelings and emotions that potentiated that aggressiveness. Again, is this answer wrong? No. Is this answer correct? Apparently yes. Does this answer the question? Also no. It doesn't fully respond, so let's go back even further in time. Let's go back years, decades earlier. When this man was young, he was very shy and extremely reserved. As a child, then as a teenager, he didn't like to be in the middle of too many people. He didn't like to expose himself. He felt uncomfortable in situations that involved a lot of people around him, especially people who were unknown. In addition, he was very sensitive to negative things. When someone criticized, he suffered a lot. When he felt rejected or felt that he had done something wrong, it shook the boy to the core. In addition, he had difficulty bonding with people. He wanted to, but he couldn't. In addition, because he was very quiet, he was bullied at school. In most of them, verbal aggressions, he was teased. He was teased by his classmates and sometimes even physically assaulted. At home, things were not very good. The father and mother fought a lot. The mother was frustrated with the relationship, took it out on the boy, beat him frequently. All of this created an adaptive response in this boy. As he was frequently assaulted, he became aggressive. By being aggressive, he realized that he was less aggressive, and then he internalized this aggressiveness as a response. Because of that, he had that reaction in traffic. Okay, this is a developmental response. That is, we're looking at the developmental psychology of this human being, at his life story, at what happened in his life and what made him who he is. We know today, solidly in science, that emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and violence, especially in childhood, can have marked effects on a person's personality. The person may have difficulty bonding in their adult life. She may even become a depressed or anxious person or both. She can also become an aggressive and reactive person. The person may have an exacerbated degree of neuroticism, a personality trait. This is a personality trait that, among many other things, causes a person to become highly sensitive to negative emotions, highly reactive and anxious. But wait, that's also a personality psychology response. After all, as I just explained to you, we're talking about personality traits that have changed due to the context of the person's life. And now we can go back even further in time. The mother, when she was pregnant, was beaten by her husband. She lived in a threatening environment, always fearing for her own life and the life of the child that was growing inside her. This caused changes in that child's brain development while she was in the womb. And when the boy grew up, his brain's aggression circuits were more active and more sensitive than normal. That's why he had that reaction in traffic. That's a response from prenatal development. We know with solid evidence in science that pregnant women exposed to risky environments have children who are more prone to aggression. Let's go back in time. The boy was introverted and had a high degree of neuroticism, and these personality traits have genetic inherited components. All of this that I said about aggression and development in and out of the womb also occurs in monkeys and rats, for example. The mammalian brain develops poorly in cases of affective neglect, affective abuse, or when growing up in a hostile, violent environment. This is true of every mammal that has ever been studied. This is a common biological trait between us and other mammals. In addition, the brains of mammals in general and humans in particular have circuits responsible for territoriality and aggressiveness. All of them. And these circuits are more active and more sensitive in the brains of males in general than females. Then we could answer why the man did it. Biologically, there is a genetic tendency to aggressive responses on the part of male mammals. This aggressive response happens when that individual feels that their territoriality is being threatened. Because of this, when the other guy almost caused an accident, the brain circuits that developed under the influence of these genetics activated in that man's brain, and so he pulled up alongside the car and cursed at the guy. This is an answer that looks at the genetic history of that man, the ancestors, and the other living things that have genetically similar characteristics. Well, which of these answers is right? Which of these several that I gave is the answer? That's the point of today's video. None of these answers are right in isolation. They are all correct, in a way, correct. But none of them answers the question why the man did it in isolation. Who you are, why you do what you do is something that can be answered from several levels of analysis. That's the scientific term. Keep it. Level of analysis. I've given you answers at a number of different levels of analysis. On the biological level, I told you about neurophysiology and neuroendocrinology. I also told you about nutrition, which involves both biology and the environment. At the developmental level, that is, in the history of that person's development, I talked about society and culture, about the life history, about the prenatal history. But all of this dialogues with biology, and at the genetic level I looked at the ancestors and the commodities between our species and other species of living beings. And I can also work on the psychological level, ask this man to tell me what he felt and why he did it. I can ask him to tell me what went through his mind, what was the reason that led him to do what he did, that is, what happened in his mind when he did that. Each of these levels of analysis is a category of behavior study. But what I'd like you to realize is that these categories are artificial. They're created by scientists to make it easier for them to analyze. Just like teal is just a name, because actually what we have is a color that lies on a spectrum between green and blue. In teal, there's a bit of both. There's blue, there's green. But we human beings conventionally call it teal to make it easier for us to understand. Human behavior is a gradient, it's a spectrum, it's a continuum, as scientists say. It's not a bunch of separate categories, it doesn't occur in a categorical way. There is no such thing as a genetic category in nature. There is no such thing as an environmental, biological, brain, social, or psychological. All behavior is at the same time genetic, environmental, cerebral, psychological, social, cultural, and so on, all at the same time. When I say that there is a genetic component to personality traits, a lot of people think that this means that we are condemned to the personality that we have, which is a definitive sentence. This is wrong. Everything has a genetic component, everything. Studies show that even musical taste, political preference, such as leaning more to the left or more to the right on the political spectrum, all have a genetic component. But that doesn't mean it's just genetic. Alzheimer's disease, for example, has a genetic component, but we estimate that at least half of the new cases of Alzheimer's that arise today would have been avoided if the person had lived a different lifestyle, if they had eaten better, if they had exercised more, if they had slept better, if they had been less stressed. For instance, if this person had done all of this frequently in their life, they would not have developed Alzheimer's, even though they had the genetic component to it. We can look at behavior at the level of social, cultural, individual, biological, genetic, and so on. These are categories of study of human behavior, but these categories are like colors. They are categories created by us human beings. You see that there's no blue in nature, there's no pink in nature, there's an electromagnetic spectrum, and a tiny little piece of that spectrum is interpreted by our human sensory apparatus, the eyes and the brain, as what we call colors. And then we give a name to this color to make our lives easier, to facilitate our daily lives and our communication. But the teal blue on my brother's blouse could be called teal green, couldn't it? Why not? After all, in that color there's blue, there's green, it's situated between blue and green on the spectrum. Someone one day decided that it looked more like blue and then called it blue. But that's a convention. That's what I want you to learn here today. The categories of studying human behavior are also conventions. They're not fragile conventions, they're scientific study-based, methodology-based, but they're still conventions. And continuing to talk about colours, just as an Eskimo can see the nuances of grey and white, which you can't. Just as a Brazilian Indian can see shades of green, which you can't. Just as a desert Bedouin can see nuances of beige, which you can't, a behaviour expert will see the nuances of behaviour according to his specialty. This is great because each expert can dive into their level of analysis. But a lot of times that can produce huge problems, especially when someone thinks that by understanding things in one category, one level of analysis, they understand all of human behaviour. This unfortunately exists, and even worse, when someone distorts the role, size, and importance of a category. There's a guy named Konrad Lorenz. He was a very famous and very important scientist. To give you an idea, he won the Nobel Prize and was the founder of a scientific field called ethology. He was Austrian and lived in the 20th century. He was alive during the Nazi regime. And this same scientist, apparently brilliant, grossly misinterpreted and distorted Charles Darwin's theory of the evolution of species. Konrad Lorenz was a propagandist for Nazi eugenics, the idea that humanity has to exterminate worse races, races that don't even exist for our species, in order for the best ones to survive. This was a pathological guy, sickly stuck in a distorted view of the category of behavioural study that we call genetics. How about we talk about psychology? See that quote here. Give me a dozen healthy, well-formed children and a world of my own making to raise them, and I guarantee to pick any at random and train them to turn into any kind of expert who selects them. A lawyer, a doctor, an artist, a merchant, a chief, and yes, even a thief. A beggar. regardless of the child's talents, abilities, vocations, and the race of his ancestors. Who said that was a guy named John Watson in 1925. He was one of the founders of behaviorism, a subfield of psychology that asserted that human behavior is entirely malleable. He believed that the human being is born as a blank slate and the environment will shape what that human being will become. He believed that if you properly shape the environment where a child is born and lives, putting in place the right rewards and punishments, you can turn any healthy human being into anything. Genius or psychopath, artist or quantum physicist. John Watson was a pathologically obsessed guy, sickly clinging to one category, the relationship between environment and behavior. His case is much less problematic than Lorenz's, of course, but here we also see the short-sightedness of those who look at a single category. Because we are not a blank slate, according to current science, we are not born totally malleable to be everything. The perfect example of this is the essence. It is the human personality. We know that there are genetic components to every personality trait that has ever been scientifically documented. Imagine any personality trait. We know today that it's virtually impossible for you to turn a person who is at one end of the spectrum of this personality trait into someone at the other end of the spectrum. For example, it is virtually impossible to turn an extremely introverted person into an extremely extroverted person. But then you turn around and say, so the Nazi scientist there was right. It's all genetic. No, he was wrong. We are not born as a blank slate, we are not born this way. We have a biological nature, we have genetic inclinations. But in spite of this, the environment will shape us. But we are not totally malleable like a blank slate, we are partially malleable. Some things are more malleable than others. If you're extremely extroverted, you're not going to become extremely introverted or vice versa. But you can, for example, change a little the aspects of your introversion that make you feel bad. You can learn certain characteristics and behaviors of extroversion, bring that into your life, and modulate your personality a little bit so that you're a little less introverted in that aspect. All of this is possible. We'll talk about this in future videos about personality, so subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. There's a lot of good content out there. And before I continue, let me show you another idea, from another text, from another very famous scientist who also won the Nobel Prize. Open quotes. Normal psychic life depends on the proper functioning of the synapses of the brain, and mental disturbances come from the derangement of these synapses. It is necessary to alter these synaptic adjustments and change the paths chosen by the impulses and their constant passages so that we can modify the corresponding ideas and force the person's thinking into different channels. This text is by Egas Moniz, a physician Portuguese. This was an obsessed guy, pathologically clinging to a category of behavior study, the study of the brain. For him, everything is synapse, and if you mess with the synapse, you correct anything. That was the excuse he used to invent a surgery called prefrontal leucotomy. This surgery involved disconnecting some parts of the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the brain, and it was used to calm the tempers of very aggressive people, for example. But because this guy won the Nobel Prize, and because his surgery seemed to really improve people's very skittish temperaments, very intense emotions, it started to be done in the backyard of professionals like dentists, for example. The guy would take a hammer, an ice pick, he would hammer it around in the centre of his forehead, he would wiggle it inside, he would break the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. This butcher's way of performing leucotomy became known as frontal lobotomy. There was even a husband, seriously, who took his wife for a lobotomy when his wife was being very unruly or behaving in a way that was very inappropriate in the eyes of that husband. I'm planning to make a video as well about how lobotomy simply destroyed the lives of people who went through it. Understanding lobotomy helps to understand the brain. It's a sad story, but it helps. But anyway, this was an obsession of Egas Moniz with the synapses, saying that everything came down to them and that all you had to do was rearrange the synapses and everything would be fine. This is a good example of how a myopic and distorted view of how the nervous system works can have very serious consequences for humanity. And then you turn to me and say, "Don't you study the brain? Isn't it all about the brain?" And I tell you calmly, no, it doesn't come down to anything specific. Behavior is a tangle of complex things. Of course, everything emanates from the brain, but the brain dialogues with many other things. There are different levels of analysis, different categories, but in reality, behavior, life is one thing. I like to use the figure of a pianist to explain this. Imagine a pianist playing a beautiful symphony, and then you, enchanted, come to this pianist and speak. Hi, excuse me, tell me something. Where does this song come from? Does it come from you, from your brain, from your hands? Or does it come from the piano key? Or does it come from the sheet music you're reading? Or does it come from the strings of the piano that are playing inside? Or does this song come from the wooden piano case? Or does it come from my ears that are listening? Or does this music come and is it from the head of the composer who wrote it? Where does this song come from? If there's a pianist watching right now, tell me how many % of the songs you play on the piano are the piano, and how many % are by you, and how many % are by the composer. And then you realize that these questions are absurd. Piano music is the result of the relationship between all of this that I just talked about. In the same way, there is no such thing as X% of your behavior is genetic, X% is environmental. There is no such thing as that. Psychology explains behavior better. It explains X%, neuroscience explains X% better, and so on. You are the music, you are the result of the relationships between genetics, nutrition, society, culture, life history, your body, your brain, your mind, your ideas, your decisions, your choices. You know, it is not because everything emanates from the brain that everything is explained by the brain. It is not because such a person has gone through something in his life that everything is explained by life history. Just because you have a greater propensity for a personality trait doesn't mean it's all explained by personality. But it turns out that in order to facilitate our understanding of the world around us, we need to name and categorize some things, and the levels of analysis is one of them. And the one that I like the most and will work on the most here on the channel is the level of individual analysis. I'm not going to work at the level of social or other analysis. That is, 90% of what I say here in the videos is about you, your brother, your mother, your husband, your wife, your son, your friend, and so on. But there are scientists who study the social level, who look at the group, at the interaction of a human being with various other human beings. Anthropologists, for example, sociologists. At this level of individual analysis, I'm going to cover behavior, emotions, feelings, brain, genetics in the videos. I'm going to talk about hormones, I'm going to talk about personality, life history, decisions, choices, nutrition, among many other things. I'm going to try my best not to fall into the trap of staying in one category, and I'm going to try to show you in a simple way how complex you are. Remember, these categories were created by us humans to make it easier for us to understand. In nature, in reality, in the world of flesh and blood, what exists is human life. What exists is your life. Full of nuances, and to explain your life, I will focus on at one or another level of analysis or several at the same time. But at the end of the day, what matters is your life. What matters is that you understand your music and how it is the result of this incredible relationship of so many complex and different levels of analysis. I invite you to revisit this video from time to time when you can, because as our understanding of human behavior matures, the ideas passed on here become clearer and more true to us. This is just the first video on the channel, but remembering that the content here on the channel is a series, you can watch single videos and understand the message, but I advise you to watch all the videos because one complements the other. Just go to the playlist and everything is there organized by categories for you to watch. So subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. If you have a family member or friend who needs the content in this video to share with them, learning from more people is always better and easier. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.